Did you sign that letter?
So I don't.
I just feel like I need to ask this question. Mr. Fonzone, when you advised the companies referenced, Huawei and others, you were at Sidley?
Yes, that's right, sir.
And when a client comes to Sidley, you have to fill out a form that says, you know, here's my client name, here's my mailing address for business purposes, and here are my political beliefs. Is that the way it works?
There's definitely a client intake process. I don't remember all the particulars of it.
I mean, big law it's kind of like who can pay the freight, right?
That's an aspect of the
Okay.
intake process, I'm sure.
I understand. Professor, I'm looking at a letter dated March 16, 2020. It's a letter to Governor Lamont in Connecticut. The title of it is Urgent Action Needed to Protect Individuals in Connecticut's Prisons and Jails from Coronavirus 19 Pandemic. Did you sign that letter?
So I don't recall sitting here today, Senator.
Here's your signature. Here it is back here. Why didn't you turn this over to us when you were asked to submit documents?
So, Senator, I made every effort to search for everything that I had ever signed. That's not a letter I remember, but I will certainly take a look at that. And
We found it was with a search on the internet.
so I apologize, Senator. I apologize.
In
that I
your
missed
letter
that.
to the governor, here's what you say. As they stand, prisons and jails are detrimental to public health and human rights and disproportionately harm marginalized communities, including Black, Brown, Indigenous, and other communities of color, immigrants, people with mental illness, people with disabilities, people in the LGBTQ plus community, people who use drugs, people engaged in sex work and street economies, and people experiencing houselessness and poverty. So if you believe that about our prisons, how are you going to ever sentence somebody to prison?
So, Senator, I will need to take a look at that letter, and I apologize that that's not something I found to hand to this committee.
You're not denying you said that.
I do need to see the letter to see the context, because again, it's not something I remember adding my name to. I can assure you,
Right.
Senator.
And you also say, first, you call on Governor Lamont to release everybody in jail. Is that right? Because of the coronavirus?
So again, Senator, I would need to see that letter in front of me. It certainly was not.
You can find it just put your name into Google. You'll find it in about 3 nanoseconds.
I will, Senator. I can assure you that
You said in your letter, Professor, we call on Governor Lamont, state of Connecticut, and all Connecticut jurisdictions to immediate release to the maximum extent possible people incarcerated pre-trial and post-conviction. And then you go on to say, talking once again about our jails, the global COVID-19 pandemic is throwing into sharp relief the untenable state of our penal system and the need for sustained action to shrink its scale, shrink its size, and shrink its scope. You sound here like the district attorney in San Francisco. If you believe that, how are you going to ever sentence anybody to jail, Professor?
I can assure you, Senator, that I understand the role of the judge, and that I can assure you prison time is an appropriate sentence in
That's
many
not what
cases.
you say here to the governor. You wrote the governor. This isn't some DoorDash delivery guy. You wrote the governor of your state 3 years ago.
So again,
When you
Senator.
were in law school.
So again, Senator, I would need to look at the letter. It sounds like it was written at the height of the pandemic, where governors were looking for.
You also wrote the governor, you said, people over the age of 55 are at the greatest risk for COVID-19, but also pose the least public safety risk to our communities. People in this age group can and should be released immediately to mitigate the spread of COVID-19. You think the governor just, if you're over age of 55, he should have let everybody go?
No, Senator, that's not a position.
That's what you said.
Okay.
Here
and
it is, biggest house.
Again, Senator, I will look at that letter. I can assure you that
Find it on Google, Professor.
What happens when a judicial nominee tells the Senate she doesn't remember signing a controversial letter? But Senator John Kennedy has the document in his hands. That's exactly what unfolded during a tense confirmation hearing. Kennedy confronted the nominee over a 2020 letter urging Connecticut's governor to release inmates, reduce prison populations, halt arrests, and even stop transferring illegal immigrants into IC custody during the COVID-19 pandemic. As the nominee repeatedly said she needed to look at the letter, Kennedy wasn't buying it. Here's what happened. Kennedy opened by referencing a March 16, 2020 letter addressed to Connecticut Governor Ned Lamont titled Urgent Action Needed to Protect Individuals in Connecticut's Prisons and Jails from the Coronavirus Pandemic. When he asked whether she had signed it, the nominee responded that she couldn't recall. But Kennedy immediately pointed to her signature on the document and then questioned why it hadn't been turned over to the Judiciary Committee during the confirmation process. The nominee apologized, saying she had tried to locate everything she had signed over the years but simply didn't remember this particular letter. Kennedy noted that his staff had found it with a simple internet search. Kennedy then read portions of the letter describing prisons and jails as harmful to public health and disproportionately damaging to marginalized communities. He pressed the nominee directly. If you believe that about our prisons, how are you ever going to send somebody to prison? Rather than defend the language, the nominee repeatedly said she needed to review the document and understand its context. She argued that the letter was written during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic and emphasized that judges must follow the law. Kennedy wasn't satisfied. He pointed out that the letter called for releasing incarcerated people, to the maximum extent possible, and shrinking the size and scope of the prison system. To him, those statements reflected far more than a temporary pandemic response. If you're enjoying this breakdown of today's hearing, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest coverage of Washington's biggest political moments.
You also say Governor Lamont should issue an executive order to direct the state's attorney offices and law enforcement entities, including the town and city police departments, and any federal law enforcement entity operating within the state to immediately cease adding to the incarcerated prison population given the high risk of infection posed by the population increase. You asked the governors to tell every law enforcement official in the state to stop arresting people and putting them in jail, didn't you?
So again, Senator, I have to look at that letter. I do think there were modifications that the governors were making around the country to respond to the pandemic.
You also had an opinion in your letter about, can I have another 30 seconds, Mr. You had an opinion in your letter about immigration. You said immigration detention poses the same health risks to jails and prisons, and Connecticut law enforcement must stop feeding people into the unsafe and inhumane immigration detention system. Then you say Governor Lamont should release all individuals currently in state custody who are awaiting transfer to ICE custody, and the governor should declare a moratorium on all such future transfers. How, if somebody is in our country illegally and commits a crime, are you going to put them in jail if you believe this about immigration?
Senator, I can assure you, were I so fortunate to be confirmed, I would treat crimes seriously.
That's not what this letter says, Professor, and it was 3 years ago. It wasn't when you were in law school, and you didn't turn it over to us. We had to find it on our own.
Senator, the chair has been generous in time. I think you've had...
The questioning became even more intense as Kennedy highlighted additional portions of the letter. He read a section suggesting that people over age 55 posed little public safety risk and should be released immediately. The nominee responded that this was not her current position, but Kennedy quickly replied, "That's what you said." Kennedy also cited language urging Governor Lamont to direct law enforcement agencies to stop increasing prison populations during the pandemic. He interpreted that as asking police to stop making arrests. The nominee maintained that many governors around the country adopted temporary emergency measures because of COVID-19 but again avoided directly defending the specific recommendations contained in the letter. Kennedy then shifted to immigration. He quoted the letter's call for ending transfers of inmates into ICE custody and imposing a moratorium on future transfers. The senator asked a direct question: if someone is in the United States illegally and commits a crime, would she send that person to jail? The nominee answered that, if confirmed, she would take criminal offenses seriously and impose prison sentences whenever the law required. Kennedy countered that her assurances did not match the positions expressed in the letter she had signed. He also reminded the committee that the document had not been voluntarily disclosed during her confirmation process. The exchange ended with Kennedy insisting that the nominee's past statements deserved scrutiny, while the nominee argued that the extraordinary circumstances of the COVID-19 pandemic provided important context and that her role as a judge would be to faithfully apply the law. Whether viewers see the letter as a temporary public health proposal or evidence of a broader judicial philosophy, the confrontation became one of the most memorable moments of the confirmation hearing. What do you think? Should nominees be judged primarily by their past advocacy, or by the commitment they make under oath during confirmation hearings? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you'd like, I can also create a high CTR description, thumbnail text and SEO tags to match this script.